It's very important. To your point, you made it when you for instance, in metaphor center ice, you're playing defense all the time. You can push the other team back to center ice, but you're not going to score any goals.
Let's get the hockey analogy.
Either little ways or very deep into Russian territory. It changes that calculus in a big way, and Russian leaders now know that the war is being seen and felt by Russian civilians in their own on their own. So it brings a whole new right there to the Russian side, and
So Canada, which, there's some howitzers and the promise to buy a NASAM, which would be able to fire in the Russian territory should it ever be delivered because of the procurement.
I'm fine. I was right.
It says go ahead. France was very explicit today. President Macron. Germany, not quite as boisterous as France, but moving in that direction. The U.S., though, is allegedly reporting times and other places that they are reconsidering their policy not to do this, and it's maybe Secretary of State Antony Blinken and his department that is trying to drive this change. Where do you think this goes? There's a series of NATO meetings leading up to the Washington, D.C. Leader Summit in July, which is a long time in that conflict. Do you think the U.S. will eventually relent here? Because President Zelensky's pleas are getting loud and persistent.
This doesn't sound very unbiased.
Right. So we can
it kind of seems like he has a specific sort of viewpoint at that in journalism. You have to have this whole balanced thing, this unbiased thing. It kind of seems like he's, from his journalistic standpoint, advocating for Ukraine to use NATO weapons to. It doesn't seem like he's very balanced about this issue.
And Finland are the countries that are now taking off all limits. And you make a good point. The Canadian weaponry, which is very important. The Canadian contributions have been very good. Really are not the ones that limitations taken off. These, these HIMARS missiles that have come from the States, the rocket systems, artillery and artillery rounds could well do damage inside Russia. So that's that Ukraine is getting from Belgium, Denmark, Norway, and are right now limited to flying over only Ukrainian territory, that when those limitations come off, all of the tactics and operations that are being planned by Ukrainian military leaders on behalf of the strategies that Zelensky and the political leadership want to blunt the Russian attack and turn it around become far simpler. Right now, they've got a matrix, they've got a layout on the table every time they start to develop an operational plan. And check to see which weapons systems and weapons can be used if indeed they press across Russian borders. When you take off those limitations off, as we're seeing more and more nations doing,
It bit me. Oh my god, it bit me.
To your point about
I'm not bleeding, but
I actually think that they are asking nations like Canada to throw out these trial balloons and see what sort of response comes back from Russia. I think that this is in anticipation of what's going to take place in Washington in July.
And that was it. What are these creatures, huh?
I got it!
Administration has quietly given Ukraine permission to strike inside Russia, solely near the area of Kharkiv, using U.S.-provided weapons. 3 U.S. officials and 2 other people familiar with the move said Thursday a major reversal that will help Ukraine to better defend its second largest city. Once again, none of this is going to help Ukraine at all. All of this is going to...
You guys don't stop. Just keep on. Pick it back up if you want.
wrecked even more. More people killed totally unnecessarily. It's going to have the opposite effect. This is going to lead to more conflict, more escalation. And Ukraine's gonna
And
get
he might
wrecked
walk up
even
on your
more.
hand, or he might just walk inside mommy's shirt.
The president recently directed his team to ensure that Ukraine is able to use U.S. weapons for counter-fire purposes in Kharkiv, so Ukraine can hit back at Russian forces hitting them or preparing to hit them. One of the U.S. officials said. In the last few days, the U.S. made the decision to allow Ukraine flexibility to defend itself from attacks on the border near Kharkiv, a second U.S. official said. Now let's take a look at what Putin is saying about this. And we can look at this response and ask ourselves whether this move is going to help Ukraine or help or hurt Ukrainians and people around the world.
Европе. С чем они играют? Они должны государство с небольшой территорией, с очень плотным населением. И этот фактор это серьезная вещь, и мы, конечно, постоянная эскалация.
Please tell me you got that on video.
Как поведут себя Соединенные Штаты, имея наш паритет в сфере стратегического оружия? Трудно сказать. Они хотят глобального конфликта. Если, там, скажем, зайдут какие-то контингенты европейских стран вместе с поляками, под видом освободить какие-то подразделения Украины, стоящие вдоль границы. Damn! Безопасности. Чушь и дурь. Вот и все. А если также поражение это наверняка и еще один шаг к серьезному конфликту в Европе и глобальному конфликту. Им это нужно?
Thanks, Colonel, but it seems good.
Мы все равно будем так, как мы считаем, вне зависимости от того, кто находится на территории Украины. И вот это они должны знать точно.
I mean, this is just it, right? They said for years, here's
Fun right here.
Stop pumping weapons into Ukraine, stop pushing up to these borders, stop expanding NATO, stop do not attempt to expand NATO into Ukraine, and the U.S. should go on with Canada's continue to do it anyway. I don't know if this is the kind of thing you want to keep pushing, like, especially after this whole defensive unit has failed. They've lost territory. Again, people are being thrown into these front lines with no training to be killed against their will a lot of the time. Has been totally stripped for parts. Resources privatized. But no, let's see what happens if we just keep pushing it. Let's keep pushing. Maybe this time it's going to maybe this is going to be the thing that really destabilizes Russia and leads to Putin getting overthrown. Maybe it's finally going to happen. Like, this is delusional at this point to still believe that. You know? Just wait. Don't worry. We have Ukraine. We've got your back. We've got your back. Keep bombing Donbass. Keep killing Russians. We're going to give you what you need. Keep killing Russians. Don't worry. If they do anything, we're going to have your back. We're going to hit them with the biggest sanctions package you can imagine. We're going to destroy the Russian economy with our sanctions. It's going to destabilize them. We're going to be totally safe. We're going to have have your back. Well, how has that worked in practice? How has that worked in practice? It has been an unmitigated disaster. And Russia's economy is doing better than ever. I hope it was worth it for everyone that had to be killed to completely fail like this. So yeah, it seems like a good idea. Let's definitely keep testing this. Let's keep pushing. Let's not recognize our failure and recognize exactly what we've done to lead to this point. Let's continue pushing.
Wow! Oh my gosh!
It is kind of amazing how they kept stringing them along. It's sad. Like, honestly, this is why I get frustrated as well when people talk about this, or when people try to criticize me and say you hate Ukrainians, you want Ukrainians to die. Me, the person online, I care about Ukraine. That's why I think we should be killing more Russians. We should escalate this more, more weapons. Take the leash off these Azov guys. Have them strike in Russia. Do terrorism in Russia. Whatever it is, I support it. That's how much I support Ukraine. And saying, like, I think it is bad to get Ukraine completely wrecked. That's the I don't care about Ukraine position, I guess. People who care about Ukraine are sort of hell bent on making sure it stops existing. And Carnova just mentioned this DJ chat where they talked a little bit about this. They're going to the timestamp though. Carnova, I don't have a timestamp. Didn't seem to work. Oh, still don't. Do you have the actual, if you can tell me.
They had prisoners running themselves to control conflict that, well, it's either escalating. That being said, we're going to move on here to another tragic conflict that, well, it's either escalating or coming to a close. I don't know. You never know. There's different reporting every day. That's the 2, 3. Also, some interesting new war initiatives, and we are very honored to be joined here as we sort through all this by Vijay Prashad, who, amongst many other superlatives, is the executive director of the Tricontinental Institute. Vijay, as always, thanks so much for being with us here. Oh, you're muted.
Leftist audio.
I seem to do this a lot, but it was a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be with you, but also...
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this. Thank you, Anon, for gifting a sub to our friend, If you guys want to, please subscribe to this program. 30 subs to go to get to the goal. I'm trying to make the little number go up every single day. If you can, please subscribe to the program. I'd appreciate it a lot. And also make sure you subscribe to Breakthrough News and the People's Dispatch as well. But also this show that you're watching right now. The guy that was talking about Gooning with us. That's right.
to follow John and that report on
three former guests of the show. It's true.
Thanks for putting me right out.
Yeah, this is like a baseball lineup. We put our heavy hitters here towards the end, so we can make sure to. It's interesting sort of dichotomy here. On the one hand, you have this interesting new peace initiative from China and Brazil, sort of counterposed to the Swiss peace initiative. So that looks like perhaps hopeful. But on the other hand, you have this discourse that's growing in America and Europe to try to allow the use of more weapons to strike deeper into Russia, which at least allegedly the U.S. had been preventing. So, I mean, does it feel like we're perhaps on the precipice of something new in terms of the peace process with other forces getting involved, and that's why there's this desperate struggle to escalate the war right here at this moment that Ukraine seems to be losing pretty badly?
I think a timeline is useful. In February, the Chinese government released a very interesting 12-point peace principle. It's not really a peace plan. set of principles which included things like stability for grain exports from Russia and Ukraine, which included a ceasefire, of course, which included exchange of prisoners of war and so on. These principles document, which could have then been the basis for a discussion, whether bilateral or multilateral. Bilateral meaning the Russians and the Ukrainians sit down and talk through these principles which they would have to agree to in advance, or multilaterally bring a few other actors in and so on. It could have been the basis for quite a useful dialogue, China being an important power in the world. This is February of 2024. There's also this terrible
I got it all on video.
in Gaza against the Palestinians. The International Court of Justice was looking at the question of genocide. At the time, it would have been perfect if the sober major countries in the world said to the Russians and the Ukrainians, would you in advance sign on to this and come and sit down, maybe in Switzerland, formerly neutral country. Let's emphasize that used to be neutral, no longer neutral because it's taken the side of Ukraine in this conflict. Okay, that was in February. Now, the Russian forces, as the spring entered, that region, Russian forces started to make gains towards the west of Donetsk, expanding the line towards the various industrial cities, which have actually a majority Ukrainian population. Of them, Krasnovich is one of the most important. But then Russia did something interesting. They started a northern offense. Again, coming in from the north into Kharkiv, into Sumy, and so on, putting pressure on Ukrainian forces, which had been, in a sense, without reinforcements that they needed, particularly ammunition. So the Ukrainians started to pull troops away from the Donetsk border and move them up to the north. There was like the Russians were going to make some major breakthroughs on the north. A good place to face the conflict when you look like they're going to do this and come to the table. But no, this is exactly where the U.S. administration...
The problem with that is, too, when you turn down the possibility of peace talks because you think you're going to win and you try this counteroffensive that doesn't work, well, then when you start losing ground, then you say, well, now can we have peace talks? And it turns out that falls on deaf ears. People are not quite as interested in hearing about that. You can't just say no peace talks when you think you're winning, and then as soon as it becomes clear that's not the case, so now we would like to do that. Well, you kind of missed the window, unfortunately. And you literally saw Lincoln's no peace talking to Ukraine, or going all the way back to the early stages of this conflict with Boris Johnson. Flew over to Ukraine and was like, no deal. No deal. The U.S. won't accept any peace deal. Exactly.
Are you alright?
Absolutely. No deal. And all these keyboard warriors in America. No deal. No deal with the Russians.
He's trying to breathe.
We have no connection whatsoever to any of this.
Of Joe Biden and sections of the U.S. Congress, led by the Speaker of the House, who was under pressure from the right-wing Republicans not to allow more funding to go to Ukraine. They made a deal, and in April passed a bill for $95 billion, $61 billion of those dollars to go to Ukraine, the rest to Israel and to Taiwan. This deal of the money, $61 million to Ukraine, plus statements saying, for instance, we're going to give you the most advanced bombers. There may even be the possibility of medium-range missiles and so on. All of this inflamed the situation. At that point, in a few weeks ago in May, Vladimir Putin of Russia, president of Russia, went to China, met with Xi Jinping. Again, they discussed the situation in Ukraine. Now, it's important that people don't misunderstand this, that Russia and China don't have a military agreement. In other words, China is under no military obligation to come to Russia's defense. They have two kinds of agreements. One is that they signed just weeks before this war began in 2022.
And you're right. It's not about Ukraine. It's about weakening and destabilizing Russia. But unfortunately,
Where you going?
has not happened. Russia is weakened or destabilized. They're in a better position than ever. So it's failed. So maybe it's time to start sacrificing people in Ukraine who we're supposed to kill. It's a failed plan to destabilize Russia. It didn't work. Like, I'm sorry, I don't know what you want people to, I don't know what I'm going to tell you. It didn't work. They tried it and it didn't work. So why are we still insisting that people have to keep dying for this?
Yeah.
It's pointless.
But again, when Putin arrived in Beijing, Xi Jinping walked down the stairs to go.
One amazing bird show. This is a good point as well.
He's pushing me! Oh, I'm going back!
Europe, more dependent, more of just a client state in America. State. That's true as well.
Greet him is an enormous step.
It's
to
Ukraine.
show
It's
how
sacrificing the Ukrainian pawn
Oh.
to further increase Europe, all of Western Europe. And people still want to say this is about helping Ukraine. Yeah, bombing Nord Stream, exactly.
I don't pull it off the wall.
And that's what it is. It's not just about destabilizing Russia or turning Ukraine by client state military base. It's about further increasing your grip over all of Western Europe.
closeness between Russia and China. Trade between these two countries has gone up to about 240 billion annually, and most of that trade is conducted in renminbi, not in dollars. In a sense, to de-dollarize their bilateral trade. This is important. So the Chinese are eager to have a deal in this war. They think this war has gone long enough, must be shut down before it intensifies both at the Ukrainian front and at the Taiwan front. They are concerned that this will inflame both ends. So they want to be part of the debate and discussion. Unfortunately, this money from the United States is really undermining the peace debate and even the so-called peace discussions to be held. It's not clear whether China will go for that. Russia has not been invited. This is a facade. This is not exactly a real bilateral discussion. It's a real facade, Eugene. I don't hold out any prospects for peace coming out of Switzerland.
And speaking of holding prospects for peace coming out, it's just how are you going to hold peace talks and not include one of the warring parties, Russia? And Vijay, this reminds me of what they did in Syria. Where they would hold these talks in Geneva, and oftentimes they wouldn't even bother inviting anybody from which was one of the parties.
Immediately no. I'm telling you right now, seeing what I needed to see.
As we enter an era where we see the U.S. increasingly, and what it represents, is related in a lot of the world, is like not taking it so seriously, particularly when it comes to peacemaking. And then you see other countries like China increasingly stepping in, at least in some ways, right? They brokered peace deals between Saudi Arabia and Iran, for example, which has played a huge role in helping keep the region stable during a time when, war technically should be exploding everywhere. And now you have a country like Brazil stepping in to a potential peace deal with the Ukrainians and the Russians. I mean, what does this say about the future of diplomacy?
Let it rip, tater chip.
And where the desire for actual stability lies in the world, when the most powerful countries that claim to represent the, international civilized order are obstacles to peace, and everybody else is trying really hard to make stability possible.
Well, firstly, for the last decade, we've seen this construction of the alternative government scenario. So you talked about Syria. In the various rounds of negotiations in Istanbul, in Berlin, and so on, they did have a Syrian government. The Syrian government from Damascus. It was the Muslim Brotherhood group that was from Istanbul that would be there representing Syria. In the same way, they constructed the government of Juan Guaido of Venezuela. And they were negotiating with what they said is the Venezuelans, but in fact, it's a Potemkin Venezuelan government, a fake Venezuelan government. There was a fake Syrian government. I'm surprised that we don't have a Juan Guaido or Juan Guaidowski showing up in this, because that's one of their strategies in the last decade has been to construct a kind of pretend government and negotiate the government in power. You know, whether the government in power is one that has majority support or not, they are the government in power. That's the nature of statecraft, is you got to take it seriously. But the Western tried out this strategy of sort of inventing a government. So that's one. I don't think that they have the time to invent a Russian government to bring it to Switzerland, but that's one of their own strategies. In this case, it's obvious that this is not about bringing peace to the conflict. It's about reinforcing support for Ukraine. And this is the reason why the Ukrainian president, Mr. Zelensky, is so eager that Joe Biden come to Switzerland. Mr. Biden is not presently planned to go to Switzerland, largely because, well, he's in the middle of an election campaign which he may not win. So he has not been planning to go to Switzerland for the June meeting. It was understood that his Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, would represent the United States, but Mr. Biden has made it clear he wants him there because that would provide what the Switzerland meeting is all about, and it's all about really reinforcing support for Ukraine. And this is the reason why the Chinese are not, right now saying they are going to Switzerland. They don't want to go to Switzerland because they don't want to go to a meeting which is not about peace, but is about standing with Ukraine to continue the war. The Brazilian situation is interesting. The Brazilians have put something on the table in the same way as Lula early on in the conflict in Gaza said Brazil is mediate. Unfortunately, none of the sides to the party have taken the Brazilians totally seriously. What would be very